Welcome back. So I have a question for you. Are you addicted to love? Now, we've heard this before. It's almost cliche, addicted to love. Well, what does it mean? We're going to talk a little bit about that. So in this section, we're going to talk about how you can replace the drama that tends to happen in relationships with true love. So as usual, we're going to explain what we mean and then give you some tools. So have you or anyone you know ever said something to the effect of, how is it that I can love her one minute and hate her the next? Like, how is it even possible to feel those two different extremes for one person? Or what about something like, man, I swear he's my soulmate, but we still fight all the time. Now, in everything that we've done with relationship workshops and coaching, we have met a lot of people who have this experience. So if you've ever been there, you're not alone. So ultimately, what happens in relationships is that what starts out as this like euphoric feeling of love turns eventually into like a love-hate type cycle. And for some people, it's really extreme between the love and the hate. And for others, it stays more moderate. And you might not ever hate them, but it's like this back and forth and this cycle that happens over and over and over again. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what the process that most relationships go through, like what path do they take? And as I'm talking about these different stages, I want you to ask yourself, if you are in a relationship, what stage do you feel like you're at? And then either whether you're in one or not, think back to either the beginning of the relationship or other times that you've had relationships and really see if you can see this pattern, because it's very, very common. And ultimately the goal is to not have to go through this over and over again. You can stop it. So this is the typical cycle. So at first you meet the person and you're just flooded with this feeling of euphoria, which is actually brain chemicals. It's very simple. It's brain chemicals. Isn't that amazing to think that that in-love experience is just happening in your brain? Well, anybody who's been in that experience knows that eventually it fades, and here's why. So at first you're in love with the person and it's like you finally feel whole. It's this person who completes you. Usually it's a very intense feeling. And a lot of times it's like you might have been depressed or had pain or had things that you felt were wrong with you that, like, miraculously, now that you're with this person, you feel healed. And it's amazing. And that's the first stage. And then the next stage is you start to notice that sometimes the person doesn't meet your needs. And sometimes that feeling isn't there quite as strong. And it starts to make you feel a little bit needy. Sometimes you might feel clingy. This is phase 2. So phase 3 is you're really feeling like addicted to this person. And the reason why is because if you had a drug all the time, 24 hours a day, you wouldn't really be addicted because you wouldn't notice the difference. So what happens is once you start to feel euphoric around them and you feel high when you're with them, and then sometimes either because they're not there or they're not meeting your needs, you feel low, so you feel like you're aching for it, you're yearning for it, you're fixated on getting it, you're constantly thinking about being around them. And this is the phase of being addicted to the euphoric feeling. And quite literally, there are brain chemicals going on that when they fade, your body actually wants them. So there's some literal level of addiction going on here. So then what happens in the 4th step is that the ability for your body to feel so in love starts to fade. The chemical reaction starts to fade. And what happens is that the pain that you had before comes back. The problem is that rather than realizing, oh, well, I was just high for a while and now my pain's coming back, then you go, oh, it must be this person's fault. It must be something they're doing. It must be something wrong with the relationship. And so we blame the relationship, the other person, for our pain coming back when really it's just the pain we had in there all the time already. So then level 5, which is the great fun part, is that that's when the drama begins. And here's why. Of course, you're constantly trying to get to that state and you find it more and more challenging. And the other person often is going through the same thing. And you kind of start to pick at each other. You start to attack each other. You usually get jealous. Sometimes one or the other person becomes controlling. And of course, why is it that we do this? It's like, well, ultimately what it comes down to is that we're trying to manipulate our partner in a way to try to force them to meet our needs. And so it's definitely not effective, and depending on who you are and what experiences you had in your life, this can just be a really irritating point in your relationship, or it can really lead to some drama in your life. And this is the part that tends to happen over and over again. Because unfortunately, what's happened is we had this addiction to this euphoric feeling, and as we start to not be able to access that drug anymore, then a new one comes in. And even though drama is not nearly as fun as euphoria, it still is a high, and it makes us feel alive, and we get addicted to that. And so this is why so many relationships that start out being so wonderful end up failing. And so the key to not getting stuck repeating this with every new relationship over and over and over again, or getting stuck in a relationship where you're just constantly fighting because you're addicted to that experience and constantly trying to get back to that feeling of euphoria, instead of doing that craziness, you can stop. And instead you can replace the whole thing with true love and a functional relationship. Now imagine that.